Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers and sisters, as you know, I'm diving deep into Islamic history, looking back at some of those key figures of our past and trying to learn a bit more about them, something maybe we haven't come across. So I invited Sheikh Abid here with us and to really dig deep into some of those things that we may not have heard. Sheikh, you know, as we've been speaking through, I've noticed something very similar, is that most of these people haven't got, you know, they're not geniuses from birth, you know, they haven't been gifted or they haven't started from 2 years being a hafiz or something like that. And it reminds me of ash-Shafi'i rahimahullah, that he had an incident with his student where his student is a bit, you know, not the creme de la creme, let's say. And my memory is a bit weak, but I think there's something about memory in that story, isn't there?
Yes, so this is the interesting thing. When you look at these personalities that history has left behind for us, such as ash-Shafi'i rahimahullah and his students, what you notice is there's a spectrum. Some of them were absolute geniuses. There's no question about that. Yeah. Ash-Shafi'i, as we all come to see, you know, had that. You know, he was a youngster. He was originally from, you know, born in the Gazan area, in Gaza itself. And then he, from that, you know, moved over and he moves to Egypt. He travels even to Iraq, etc. But he is a young boy gifted with immense intelligence. He comes from a notable family. You know, he in fact has the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ himself, is a Muttalibi, etc. And he memorized even the Muwatta of Imam Malik as a youngster, such that when he went to Imam Malik saw this guy's, you know, this Imam to be, at that point not an Imam, has the real, you know, spark of genius. In fact, what happens is he learnt from the people of Makkah because he was brought up there, and with his mother. And so once he'd completed the learning that was available to him, he, you know, his relative, you know, the Emir of Makkah writes a letter, and, you know, he then travels with his mother and goes over to Medina. Yeah. And it's presented to the governor or the Emir, the representative in Al-Medina. And it says, please take this young man to Imam Malik, right? And, you know, ask Imam Malik intercede to see if Imam Malik will take him on as a student under his wing. Wow. Right? So...
that's a great reference letter. Just slide it to Imam Malik.
It's probably the ultimate reference, right? So at that point, you know, he's still a young boy, young man in many ways, so, and innocent. So he goes there, he hands over this letter, you know, this asking for a reference, you know, always a reference in essence. And the Emir, let's call him, receives it and says, Inna lillahi wa inna raji'un. He says, you know, to God we belong and to him we return. A statement, you know, we usually say when there's a calamity befalling. So he's like, you know, what? He says, basically, the Emir is so in awe of the fact and has a sense of trepidation. I'm going to go and have to knock on Imam Malik's door, because Imam Malik he had this kind of huge, you know, poise, gravitas. You know, he's a real, true heavyweight. All the scholars in that era. And that was an era where scholarship really predominated. Yes, yeah. And so he's the leader of them. He's like the prince of scholars. Yeah. Right? And he has this whole real gravitas about him. So he's like, how am I going to go there? And he says, ash-Shafi'i doesn't understand this at that age. So he says, no problem. If we shouldn't go to him, he can come to us maybe. Right? So he says, no, you don't understand. Right? So then he goes over, they say Bismillah, Yallah, and they go over to Imam Malik's door. He knocks on the door, the Emir, and the lady who's kind of helping out in the house, serving, etc., the house help, she kind of, you know, slides the door open slightly and she says, what's the issue? He said, we've come to see Imam Malik. She says, just wait a second. She then comes back and says that, you know, if it's for, you know, fatwa, you need some sort of like religious guidance, then come on this day, this time. And if you want to listen to a hadith, me narrate hadith and teach hadith, his hadith classes, then it's on this day, this time. And I said, no, this is different. And he hands the letter. She takes this inside. He comes out And he says, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah.
Wow.
Now even ilm, knowledge, requires references, right, and connections. So, this is not the way, this is the inheritance of the Prophet ﷺ, of the prophets of God. It's to be disseminated and not requiring links like this. Anyway, but he sees this young man is very much a young man. And he says, but I've memorized your book. And again, Imam Malik has taken that because this is something which took him time to collate and compile. And this youngster has just done it in a year and a half, right? Showing again his intelligence. And he says, I'm from the family of the Prophet ﷺ as well. Again, trying to leverage that woo Imam Malik. And then Imam Malik says to him, recognizing his intelligence, he says, "Oh young man, I see in you that potential for you to become something of a high caliber. So make sure this light that I see in you does not get extinguished through sins." Right? So that was his earliest, one of his early memories and his early advices he received from his teacher, or teacher to be at that point, which is Imam Malik. Then Imam ash-Shafi'i himself grows through the ranks. And he's now an Imam himself with all of that intelligence and acumen and prowess, even in poetry and the like. But yes, he's now his teacher in his own right. And here comes the story, the anecdote that we were referring to earlier. Rabi' bin Sulaiman, who becomes one of the heavyweights within the Shafi'i madhab itself later on. Yeah. But he was not like ash-Shafi'i in terms of his own capabilities. Right, so Shafi'i had a book that he dictated, which was right? It's a very challenging book. They say that Rabi' bin Sulaiman said, I had to read it to Shafi'i 500 times.
Wow.
But at the end of it, as you'd imagine, he mastered
it, of course, 500 times anyway.
500 times. So again, you see that sense of persistence. So it's almost like saying, you can be the genius, and we do need them. But if you don't feel like you are, that's not the impediment. That's not what gets in the way. You just keep at it, chip away, and you will actually arrive.
I just want to mention, is not one book.
It's multi-volumes.
It's multi-volumes. I believe there's a print that's in 9 volumes and there's one in 6, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely correct.
So, for him to read...
It's not an easy read.
500 times, I'm like, wow. Just the persistence and the hard work that he did, even though he may have taken his time on it, but just that chipping away is amazing. That
dedication and determination is something that so often when we kind of come across the first hurdle, so you're trying to learn Arabic because you understand it's important to understand the Quran in the language of His revelation. The first time you can't understand a particular grammatical thing, and you can just give up. And Shaitan comes telling us, give up. Absolutely. Just the way he says, don't give charity because you're going to feel poor. You're going to become poor. But actually, you see in these, through these exemplars, that their persistence, they didn't give in to those negative voices. And they kind of rise and transcend them. And Allah makes that example be one remembered by us, 1,200 years later.
That's, subhanAllah, so amazing, because I think many of us, myself included, feel like once we attempt something and it doesn't go our way, that we'll never be able to overcome, achieve, or master that thing. So hearing of this story where, and credit goes to ash-Shafi'i as well for being patient, and we need teachers like that. And I feel teachers sometimes don't have the patience as well, where they're not able to. We mentioned in a previous sitting where there was that Rabbani teacher, right? And that you can see being embodied in how ash-Shafi'i taught his student, right?
He really guided him along that path.
Absolutely.
And the student was so attentive, he absorbed like a sponge. Not meaning sponge in terms of being really quick, but really sincere, genuine, and in it. And Shafi'i has a poem actually, reminding us about not letting the trials of life overcome you. Try your best not to. Sometimes you will get overcome, but don't let that always be the situation. It says, دع الأيام تفعل ما تشاء وطب نفس إذا حكم القضاء ولا تجزع لحادثة الليالي فما لحوادث الدنيا بقاء. He says, let the days go by and don't let the darkness loom over you. As the gloom comes, then understand that light will actually follow thereafter. And he has so many poems. You know, he had an anecdote we remember of him with his teacher, Waki' ibn al-Jarrah. Waki' ibn al-Jarrah was a great hadith scholar. And ash-Shafi'i had an amazing memory, but he still felt like his memory was inadequate compared to some of his teachers who kind of could rattle out the hadith, you know, like that. So he says in poetry, again, couplets of poetry, he says, شكوت إلى وكيع سوء حفظي فأرشدني إلى ترك المعاصي وقال اعلم بأن العلم نور ونور الله لا يعطاه عاصي. He says, I complained to my teacher, Waki', about my weak memory, or how he perceived it to be weak. He himself. I complained to him about my weak memory. فأرشدني إلى ترك المعاصي. And he guided me or reminded me to abstain from any sinfulness to the best of my ability. He said, for indeed the knowledge of God, the knowledge of Islam is a light from God. And God will not give that light to someone who's persistently engaged in sinfulness.
SubhanAllah. And I think that's a very important lesson for us to take away, that we need to be as far away from sins and to never give up and lose that hope, because Allah at the end of the day is the one who guides and brings light.
Alhamdulillah. And you know, that connection between people, you see that in Imam Shafi'i's life, and probably all the Imams, but it's Shafi'i always stands out to me in this respect, because you see that with his teacher, initially with Imam Malik, with his teacher Waki' ibn al-Jarrah, that kind of good counsel he's receiving. Yeah. And that which his persistence with his students, such as Rabi' ibn Sulaiman. But there's a famous incident, an anecdote, where basically one of the contemporaries of Imam Shafi'i, by the name of al-Sadafi, he says, ما رأيت أعقل من ash-Shafi'i. I never met someone more intelligent than ash-Shafi'i. Notice here when he says intelligence, he's not referring to the intelligence which is well established for ash-Shafi'i, being a genius. But he's saying someone who's really wise. He says, we once discussed something, almost you could say debated it, and we disagreed on the outcome or the suggested right position on the issue. And he says, he didn't word it quite like this, but reading between the lines it becomes clear that we kind of disagreed and I went my own way. A few days later, ash-Shafi'i comes by me and holds me by the hand. And he says, is it not possible for us to disagree and still remain brothers?
Beautiful.
Right? And it was this ethos of tolerance, of trying to keep each other within your embrace while still excelling and challenging one another with your different opinions, but still remaining brothers. And that's one of the beautiful things that scholars of that generation, they really did understand. They did differ, but they knew how to keep that difference within the ethics of the prophetic guidance itself.